In this video, traders are going to look at what is open interest. Stay tuned. Hey traders, warm welcome to you. Okay, so open interest is in the futures market or the options market. Doesn't apply to the stock market because the shares in issue are the shares in issue. Right. Open interest just literally means how many people have a position open in that current futures contract at any one time. So an open interest of 10 would mean that there are 10 contracts that are open and haven't yet expired or haven't yet closed. So if you think about a buyer and a seller, we'll look at my crazy cartoons in a second, but you've got a buyer, you've got a seller. I buy one contract, someone has to sell me that one contract. Now, if I have that position open, that means we have, and the seller has the position open, he's short, I'm long, that is their open. Now, the only way we can close that contract is hold it ultimate to expiry or close it out by he will have to buy his position back and I'll have to sell my position into the market. Then we have no position each. So those are the kind of permutations we have. So let's look at some examples. So, like I say, futures contract, options contracts, those are the kind of things that this applies for. So open interest. So we've got buyer A and seller B. So this buyer exchanges money for contracts. He buys 10 contracts, whatever price it is, doesn't matter. There's a new seller, new buyer. The open interest is now 10 contracts, okay, because they're initiating new positions. It's a new buyer, new seller, both initiating new positions. Now, what happens next is we've got a new buyer comes along and he's called C, and we have a seller, and this is the same guy who was buying. So this guy was long 10 contracts, right? So he sells his 10 contracts for whatever reason. He wants to cash in the profit, he wants to cut his losses short, whatever it may be, doesn't really matter. He sells his 10 contracts to a new buyer, the new buyer pays him money. Now, the open interest doesn't change in this example. The open interest is still 10 because ultimately we've just shifted the liability of those contracts to a brand new buyer. So now we've got seller B and buyer C. Those are the guys who have got 10 contracts. Buyer A has sold his 10, so he's out of the equation altogether. And the important thing to note is that the open interest hasn't changed. All right, let's look at another example. So another example would be buyer D and seller E. So these again are fresh buyers, fresh seller. They come along, this time this guy only wants to buy 5 contracts, the seller sells 5 contracts. That means that the open interest has gone up by 5 because they're a new buyer and a new seller. The new open interest is 15. And you can see now, if let's say another example was this guy who was 5 contracts long, he decided to sell those contracts to someone who wants to cover his short, let's say B, and he got rid of the 5. These guys will be reducing their position by 5. He'd be reducing his position by 5. Then the open interest would go down to 10. And you kind of see where that goes. It's ultimately, it doesn't tell you long or short because of course for every buyer there's got to be a seller. So for someone, if the open interest is 100, it means that there's 100 contracts out there that are long and short. It could be 100 people and it could be one person on the other side of the deal. We don't know that either. It just means that that's the kind of open interest, of course, the open interest that's there that either needs to be closed or is going to be held to expiry. So how can we kind of use this information? Well, one way of looking at it, and there's kind of 2 ways of looking at it. One is a confirmation of a trend. So if a trend is chugging up the uptrend and the open interest is increasing, i.e. new participants are flowing money in, then we can assume that trend is reasonably strong and it's confirming the strength of the trend. Vice versa, if the trend is going up and the open interest is diminishing, i.e. dwindling, means that people are closing their contracts, closing their positions. Ultimately, we can assume that the trend potentially could be dying out because there's no fresh buying coming in, there's no fresh interest. Now, this is a great point to note that is different to volume. So volume is just a number that is traded. Open interest could stay the same and volume could increase because volume occurs when a buyer and a seller do a deal. Now, if we think about in this scenario where it's just shifting the open interest from one person to another, that 10 contract trade would print on the time and sales, and we'd see that as volume coming through on our chart as well, but it wouldn't change the open interest because it's moving the liability from one person to another. If, however, like this example here, we've got fresh buyers and fresh sellers coming in, not only would we see that in volume going up by 5, we'd also see the open interest increasing as well. So summarize, if we've got an uptrend or a downtrend and we see open interest increasing with that, we're assuming it's fresh money coming in and strengthening the trend. If we see an uptrend or downtrend and open interest is declining, it means that people are closing off their positions, and perhaps if there's zero open interest or very little open interest and not much activity, it means there's no kind of extra players coming in to push this and drive this further. So something to look at anyway, something to consider. Open interest, futures, options market. If you enjoyed the video, thumbs up is appreciated, guys. And by the way, I appreciate your support if you are a subscriber. Whatever you do, keep your risk managed, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.